The Decembrists tried to revolt. Well, in 1825 they were cracked down on. They were all either killed or sent off to Siberia. And that was the story of Russian history. Attempted genuine liberalizations being met by the steely wall of Russian orthodoxy plus a dictatorial and totalitarian Tsar. Now replace Putin in that role as Tsar, and this is the Russian mentality. Why do they hate liberalism? Well, they don't basically like freedom because man, you see, is evil. Man is a fallen creature. The world is under the devil. Only the church can get us out of that. Only the church offers salvation. And that is bought at the price of absolute, utter commitment to the church and faith in it and into orthodoxy. Everything that starts from the premise that we're born free and equal and that men and women have equal rights or gays have equal rights, all that is anathema. No, 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 they say. And Putin has bought into this ideology. I'm sorry for Putin because the man showed promise, intellectually I would say. I know people that actually helped him in his early days when he was mayor of St. Petersburg. I know people, academics that worked with him. And they said even then there were some dodgy signs, You don't get to be that powerful unless you basically sign a thing that says, I will do evil when required. That's why I'm not in politics. I refuse to sign that thing. So they hate gays. Putin has said personally, gays are like the devil's brew. In his mind, he's anti-homosexual. And therefore he hates the liberal tradition, which found its way through a lot of difficulty to, the acceptance of equality between men and women and different, sexual proclivities. I say, okay, but that doesn't mean that gays are always better than heterosexuals. And it means that we should be judged as human beings. Not whether we're gay or straight or whatever. It's what we do with our life force that matters. If we use that to abuse other people, harm them, then that makes us unethical. And there are, either gays or heterosexuals who've done cruel and violent things. So I think the whole debate actually has been going on in the wrong sort of way. And I tried to recommend that as a mediatory position when the Church of England was torn about this matter some years ago. I wrote to the then Archbishop of Canterbury offering a mediation to try and get ethics restored to the fundamental place. That, in other words, it's somebody's virtue that matters in the eyes of Christ, not their sexuality. But anyway, Putin doesn't seem to have, I don't know, he obviously never read ethics at university. And so there's this horrendous gap. Now that is also happening in the British state, and it would appear that there's been a penetration. What I'm talking about is not the intelligence penetration, which is definite and advanced. I'm talking about the ethical or moral penetration. And the third person in this interview is a professor who ought to know the details, called Dr. Philip Davies. He runs a unit dealing with intelligence at Brunel University in West London, which I know and love very well. And two of my daughters were born in West London, so this is my stomping ground, right? And here is this professor who probably knows more about this than anyone else I've heard talk, saying, yes, Russia has penetrated British intelligence to a huge extent, and we're in a catastrophic meltdown situation. So don't take this from me, Who on earth is training our intelligence agents? Like, we all go to the movies and think that James Bond is on the case and think that M knows what she's doing. But hang on, looks like we've lost the Cold War round 2. I mean, this is shocking. I've never been, a believer in... I've always regarded my work as a wisdom agent. I'm not an intelligence agent. I think it's a misnomer. People that, go around stabbing each other, in the dark like James Bond, they're not intelligent by definition. But somebody's got to do it, and it looks like whoever's been doing it for the UK has completely lost the plot, and I think that's shocking, and discuss. I'll talk to Dr. Philip Davies about how this has happened, and what I think the other thing that we have to realise is that some of these top Tories, some of these ruthless cutthroat idiots that are now in the cabinet and think they're running the country, you see, if you have no understanding of ethics, then accepting money, bribes, whatever, from foreign countries is absolutely fine. Whether it comes from Russia or it comes from America, the USA I mean, or it comes from Israel or Saudi Arabia, there seems to be a sort of oligarchical international elite who've adopted this ruthlessness of amorality. And because they're fabulously wealthy, they can do whatever they want, they think. And countries can come and go. They can destroy countries, just a few bribes here and there, take over the lead party. And now they've got Data Analytica and Cambridge Analytica to back them up. They can take over democracies. Well, I'm sorry, they can't. I'm the Pericles of this situation. I'm saying no. The buck stops here. It won't be allowed. Putin and his cronies can go back and be exposed. And we need a parliamentary inquiry into this as a matter of absolute priority. And Mr. Corbyn, who's still the leader of the opposition, I hope he hears this. He should be absolutely jumping up and down at question time and demanding answers and demanding this report be published, and if it's not, it should be leaked. Someone in the civil service with a conscience and a concern for our country should be leaking it immediately. And this is a matter of real significance, right? I'm not joking about it. Okay, another thing I've watched recently is Sani Shamir, who was a Pakistani-British chap who was part of the Vote Leave campaign. He was working as a technical advisor with Dominic Cummings on their 2016 campaign. And he's come public, he's admitted that they lied and they faked the result and they overspent and they did it deliberately, knowingly, in order to boost the result. And Dominic Cummings was absolutely involved in that up to his neck in complicity. It was a deliberate, engineered thing whereby they held most of the spending back to the last few days of that run up to the 2016 referendum and then pounded people with targeted ads to make them change their minds to vote leave. And it won them the election. Now this chap has said, and even though he kind of pretends he believes in Brexit as a project, he says, yeah, but it shouldn't have been won like that, we cheated. I mean, in other words, he's slightly old school. He's got a conscience and he's come clean. He's like a whistleblower. And he's supported everything that was said in the Great Hack documentary about the despicable cheating that went on in the Vote Leave campaign. So I think it's absolutely shocking that this has never been investigated properly and that the law needs changing. That referendum should be annulled and obviously another one should be held, and I think Britain should reapply to rejoin the EU if that's what the vote comes up with. Another theory I've got about Russian penetration of Britain society is, and the Tory party is, I'm just sharing this as a possibility, whether the Freemasonic elites behind the British state have been penetrated by Russian Freemasons deliberately joining in order to extract oaths of loyalty and actually take over Britain like that, because it's fairly easy. Britain is a sitting duck for a ruthless operator, and Russia has a long history of masonry, but I don't think Putin understands the point of it. Putin and his cronies, who may well be infiltrating Masons around the world, don't understand the ethics of Freemasonry, which is you don't do evil. You don't chop people up if they oppose you. You don't have them killed. You don't torture people. You tell the truth. That was why Foster Bailey wrote a book called The Spirit of Masonry. He said, look, you don't even have to join a lodge. It's more like an ethical commitment you make to God, to the universe. And Freemasonry is one of these esoteric, pale yellow. There are different forms. It's something I've written about. There's the Grand Lodge traditions of France here. It's quite important in France. A lot of Masons were people of great integrity and intellectual depth. And the same in Europe. Goethe was, Beethoven, Mozart and so on. So they're all there. But you see, some people don't understand that, and they think Masonry is just a way to get power and influence. And so perhaps they've been targeting British Masonic circles to try and, gain authority. And maybe they've managed to capture the Tory party through that, which has long had a long relationship with Freemasonry. And so I think it should be a matter of state policy that you should declare your membership of lodges and so on. And if people have nothing to hide, they shouldn't mind that. And it's very worrying. The other thing I want to report on that I've been working on in the last week is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East. So, many of the great religions focus on the Middle East. They arose from what we call the Holy Land. Christianity, all the blue boxes, Judaism, which is these ones down here, and Islam, which is these green ones here. These three amazing traditions, and others like Zoroastrianism, which is here, and the Baha'i religion, etc. They're focused on this Middle East crucible, and we had this proposal for peace by Trump and Netanyahu a couple of weeks ago, and what I'm doing is I'm going through it in detail. I'm not throwing it in the waste bin like the Foreign Minister of Kuwait did and saying it's all just trash. I'm saying let's be a bit cleverer than that. Let's look at it in depth. Let's review it. And let's see if it could be tweaked enough so that it could actually become a document that could be the basis of a long-term lasting settlement for peace between Israel and Palestine. 2 states. It's actually offering quite a lot. It is offering eventual statehood and recognition of an independent Palestine. It's offering a port off Gaza. It's offering tourist development in Jerusalem. It's offering, demilitarization of the situation. Now, there are problems with it, and I've gone into that in my footnotes, which I'm writing. So that should be published within about a week, I hope. If there were more hours in the day, I could work faster. But or if someone wants to come here and volunteer and work as my secretary, you're very welcome. So that should be published within a week, and I think it's the most significant and important peace proposal that's surfaced since the Oslo agreements, actually. There are problems with it, and I'd be very happy to engage in conversation by email, or you can call me on the telephone about what those problems are and how they can be surmounted. So that's quite important, that work. I'm also active, as you know, as coordinator for the World Intellectual Forum, or WIFE, here in Europe, and still busy with trying to get the intellectuals of Britain and Europe and all countries, France and so on, to come together and make a concerted plea to the political elites that they should change their ways and focus on what really matters, especially peace, disarmament, environmental problems. Now we've got this tragic coronavirus, so medical research is needed, and our international chairman, Dr. Swaminathan in India, has called on the Indian government to set up a research centre for research into viruses like this. There are several, there's one in Canada, there's others around, but they can always do with more. Because these are common problems, and you see, we're never going to solve the problems of the world if we can't start telling the truth to each other. I've shared before that I'm passionately interested in medicine, and I've studied and taught philosophy and history of medicine. I did a course at the University of Oxford on the ethics and spiritual traditions of medicine. And a doctor has to tell the truth. You can't get to a cure of a patient unless you come to the authentic, true diagnosis. You can't get that unless the patient tells you the truth of their condition, And then you have to consult your experience and your textbooks and all the rest, and come to the real diagnosis of what's wrong with them, and then prescribe a cure. So truth is absolutely fundamental to the medical system and to the curative process. Now, that's why as a doctor of social healing, I'm saying we have to get truth back in circulation among our so-called political leaders, and we have to get them to swear an oath of veracity when they take office. As whatever level, MP, local council, parliamentary, Privy Council, Congress, Senate, etc. As a doctor, I would say this is absolutely essential. We can't do planetary healing on this planet if everyone is just, you don't know whether they're telling the truth or not, It's interesting, this is from Ireland. It's made of bog oak, and it shows a snake wound around the staff. This is a Druid object that I use. It was given to me by a Druid in Ireland who'd handmade it. And the snake is the symbol of Asclepius, the god of healing, who was able to bring people back from the dead, right? He was such a good healer. Well, I kind of sometimes feel a bit like I'm trying to do an Asclepius here, to bring people back from the dead, who've fallen into the death of moral ignorance and cruelty and violence and torture, as if it's normal. Like this guy in Saudi Arabia who authorised the killing of Khashoggi, or like Putin, who seems to have authorised other kinds of killings and tortures and so on. They're like the waking dead, and so we need Asclepius' energy to resurrect from that moral turpitude they've fallen into, some reawakening. So I want to, coming to the end of this, I want to talk about the Druid take on that. That's why, the Druids are very closely connected to the ancient mystery schools of Greece, the Asclepian tradition. We were ancient, 3,000, 6,000 years old in Europe, and going right back to 12,000 BC in the Magdalene period. If you don't believe me, read my Encyclopedia of Druid Studies. It's much more ancient than people realise. And so my look at the UK and its crisis that we're going through, it's quite serious, folks. Europe, the European Union is the latest of the series of projects we Druids have been doing since about 3000 BC to try and get the European tribes to collaborate and work together. Druids are in Austria, Switzerland, all over the Rhine Valley, Bavaria, France, Belgium, all the way through into Iberia, Portugal and so on. And we are trying to demilitarize the continent, to get rid of the warriors and to stop the wars. We've been doing that, for a long time, and still continue with that. The European Union was a brilliant idea. It's a brilliant project and will continue. I still hope the UK will rejoin it. Failing that, I hope Scotland rejoins as a separate nation and Northern Ireland rejoins the south of Ireland and becomes one member nation in the EU. It's the best project around. The alternative is this idea of nationalism, this idea of Britain's first, Britain's the best. Well, this is just a thuggish mentality that's created. I'm sorry, there's no other word for it. And it's a pure, unadulterated misreading of what nationalism is. Okay, so I was brought up to believe in Britain, the UK, only and only because it was an instrument for the advancement of virtue in the world. That on balance, the UK has done the right thing most times, like won World War II with help from America, but it was our steely resolve during the Battle of Britain that stopped the Nazis, really. And when America was morally neutral, they weren't even in the war then. My parents met during that blitz, and they taught me to be a good person. That came first, before being British or English or anything. I was born in Canada, actually, so I'm a Canadian, dual British citizen. But I'm first and foremost a believer that truth and justice and virtue and right and light, the spiritual journey, is your first duty. That's why I was baptized, I became a Christian, because that wasn't anything new. That's what I'd been doing all my life. Christians call it the kingdom of God. That's what we try and aspire to be a citizen of. Philosophers call it the kingdom of cosmic consciousness. It's the same thing. And every box has its own way of talking about this. But ultimately it's about being a member of that community of realised, enlightened, aspiring people on the spiritual journey. The European Union is an instalment of that project. And once, as people begin to realise that we were manipulated out of it falsely, illegally, and through a constitutional coup involving Russia and Trump and the right-wing coup that's been going on simultaneously in the USA with Steve Bannon and co, it seems to be the same forces. There's so much evidence that Trump was bought for by Russian oligarchs as well, that it's a bit scary. But very interesting, and historians like me can pore over this, but because we're living through this, we have to speak out now. Okay, so what's my response? Well, as I've said before, if you've been paying attention, I'm setting up this thing called the Constitutional Reform Initiative, CRI. The situation is so, dire that we need to make a radical response. The response of the Scots is to leave the UK. I can totally understand that. They've got a problem because, it's how do you do that legally if the corrupt, tyrannical Tory party won't allow you to. And because they control the media and the press, you'll never get a majority in Parliament probably for the next 1,000 years if they have their way. So you're stuck. You're like the wife in the attic that can't get a divorce. What do you do if you're in Northern Ireland? Again, you want to be part of a civilised Southern Republic, you want to remain in the European Union, but the Tories can bring in rules saying, no, you can't have your referendum, whatever. So there's going to be real problems here. And what I've proposed, therefore, is to deal with this constitutionally. We have to reform the way the British state operates, because at the moment it can be hijacked by illiberal forces, and I think Putinism is just one of those. Trumpism is another. There are some pretty, and the extreme right-wing Likud party, I think, have played a role in fostering a climate where Brexit becomes, advisable and creating a sort of hysterical anti-Iranian concept, anti-Islamic hysteria that then, oh God, can't let the Muslims come in, enough of them, shut the drawbridge at Calais type mentality seizes people because of panic and fear. And I think also, paradoxically, the Wahhabi idea, again, illiberal, all these groups hate liberals, right? They all club together in this sort of right-wing extremist totalitarian agenda, and they're all super rich, so they all love each other and pat each other on the back because they're out to get people like me, normal, decent, ordinary liberals who believe in virtue and who believe in, the universal kingdom of God project, not the my club is the only club project. So anyway, so a constitutional response to this is what's needed. And I say that as a, reforming, intellectual, liberal, working within the traditions of John Locke, as it were, who helped usher in the Bill of Rights, which is the only constitution we have at the moment. We need a second Bill of Rights, rapidly. And I've set out the kinds of things I could see for that, what should be done. I proposed it should be agreed by a constitutional convention process, which should take place both in Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and England. And it should involve the transformation of the House of Lords, which I've worked with and have a lot of affection for. I know the House of Lords. I used to hold meetings there in the committee rooms because I was friends with Lord Ennals and other lords, Lord McNair and so on. And we discussed politics and peace back in the 90s and up to the mid-2000s. So the House of Lords, what I'm proposing is that it should be rebranded and renamed as a Federal Senate or some other name. I think Lords is probably outdated because where are the ladies now? A Federal Senate or whatever you want to call it would be then the highest legislature, and that would become the focus of the actual government cabinet ministers. What is now the House of Commons would become just the English Parliament, as you have in Edinburgh, Cardiff and Belfast. So the English House of Commons can go on doing its thing and ruling over England. Hopefully it'll elect some more intelligent MPs in due course. But the Federal Senate, what is now the House of Lords, would become the actual governing legislature. Now this is a huge reform I'm proposing. This needs to be thought through very carefully. proper rules drawn up, and Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and England would all send senators to this body, and I propose that it wouldn't be divided on party lines. I'm saying the federal Senate, you shouldn't be a senator and a party member. I think you should swear an oath of veracity, and you should swear an oath of veracity and a commitment of loyalty to do the best thing you can for the entire nation, and to work with anyone else in the federal Senate to create policies and reforms for the entire UK that will best reflect our common happiness. The current lot in the House of Commons are just unbelievably shocking. They're not representing the UK's interests at all. And what happens in that case is it's going to break up. The Scots, who are amazing people, I have huge respect for the Scottish soul, personality, mind, landscape, culture, traditions. I'm a reader at the University of Glasgow for many years, and I lived in a castle in Scotland, so I know where the Scots are coming from. And they this federal Senate idea is the only way to stop them leaving the UK. And even then it might not work. Totally understand. And so what I'm proposing, therefore, is that this new constitutional reform initiative should take place. And you can read about the other things. Just Google Constitutional Reform Initiative. Send me an email, and I'll send you the link. The website is still under construction, but it's there. It's in public. Just needs a bit of tweaking. And the duty of veracity would be another feature of this constitutional reform I'm proposing. The Scots have called for a constitutional reform process, and I'm saying the whole country should be engaged in that. Sir Keir Starmer said the same thing. He's a man of intelligence. He realises the writing's on the wall for this country if we don't get our act together. So anyway, and there are other things as part of that constitutional reform package which you can read about. So I want to end really with a final quote that I've been reading this last week. I've come across an amazing book here, which is by George Harrison, about George Harrison's life, the great Beatle guitarist. And he was the guy that mainly got them into spirituality and that discovered Maharishi, and they all went off to India. This is back in the 60s, which was just my coming of age time. I mean, I was one of that generation that listened to the Beatles albums as they came out. I was only a little boy, but it was such a fresh kind of energy that we felt everything was possible. And they were love songs. They were mainly songs about love and hope and life. Everything seems possible. The Britain that I know and love well is, represented in those times. And George Harrison was perhaps the wisest of them. This book, which is a collection of photographs written by his wife Olivia, and with text quoting all of the Beatles, but George mainly it's focusing on. I want to share a couple of quotes to finish. He talked with the Maharishi a lot, and who taught him meditation. And they were very interested in how meditation actually works, and they'd never really studied it before. These Beatles were just ordinary chaps from Liverpool, which is a city I know and love well. And you're not taught to meditate in schools, are you? I mean, unless you get me as a religious studies teacher, I always give some instruction in the different types of meditation to my pupils and different types of prayer. But normal RE teachers don't. They just teach about it, don't actually teach you how to do it. So these Beatles had no idea really about it, and they were kind of post-Christian generation. And but anyway, they had a famous interview in 1967 with David Frost. And this is the discussion. This is a report, a couple of bits of dialogue. David Frost says, "How do you come to reach this stage of meditation?" George Harrison said, "Each person's individual life pulsates in a certain rhythm. So they give you a word or a sound known as a mantra, which pulsates with that rhythm. The whole idea is to transcend to the subtlest level of thought. So you replace the thought with the mantra. And the mantra becomes more and more subtle until finally you've lost even the mantra. Then you find yourself at that level of pure consciousness. I love that quote, and that shows you, how deep a thinker George Harrison was. He was saying that in 1967. He talks in the book about, the inspiration for his songs like My Sweet Lord, which was a kind of mantra. And I want to honour him in finishing this talk and what the Beatles stood for, which was a caring, liberal, loving British society. And the book also explains that without Germany and the trip to Hamburg, the Beatles would never have come into being. We owe it to Germany. They were invited when they were a tiny little band struggling away in Liverpool to go on this great European tour and play, and that was what made them famous. It was because of the German nightclub audience that loved them. And then they caught on, and when they came back to Britain, the rest is history. And George says in the book, he says, yeah, I loved going to Germany, it was great. But when I went to India, he says, I felt like I was going abroad. And the interviewer says, well, hang on, you went to Germany, isn't that abroad? He said, no, that just felt like being at home, that's part of Europe. No, and this is even before in the EU, right? He said, no, culturally it was like Britain. No, going to India, that was really going abroad. So it was Germany that made the Beatles possible, and it was Europe that made them possible. So I just want to give honour and thanks for everything they stood for, really, and the courage they had, and George's work, particularly in exploring spirituality. And I want to come to one final quote here, which I also love. And this is when he asked the Maharishi, what is consciousness? I always remember what Maharishi said consciousness was supposed to be. The maximum effect in the shortest time with the least expenditure of energy. I love that quote. This is like a very high-level Rishi sage speaking. And it's also the principle behind Tantra, which is you do the ritual to achieve the maximum effect. You do the ceremony, you do the Yab Yum or whatever it is you're doing in order to then achieve world harmony and stabilization. It's the thinking behind all magical consciousness, summarized in a tiny little thing. This is the secret of Druidry as well. Now, I'm mindful that just before Maharishi died, bless him, in Switzerland, and it was long after George Harrison was dead, very sadly, Paul is still going on, and Ringo. The Maharishi pulled all his teachers out of Britain because he said Britain is a Scorpio nation. What did he mean by that? I was very sad at the time because I was teaching in Mansfield in Nottinghamshire, and yes, kids in Mansfield are difficult. Nottinghamshire's got a spike to it. Britain's got a tough energy, but that's why we teachers need to be in there helping. That's why we need more Maharishi types going and teaching meditation. I ran a meditation club, a philosophy club in the school I was in Mansfield, and in every school I've taught in, so that we could bring these kids into a realization that there's more to life than just sex, beer, and football. So, yeah, that's the one thing I felt that Maharishi got a bit wrong. He should have said, because Britain's a Scorpio nation, we're sending even more teachers in. And why did he say a Scorpio nation? Okay, so Britain, in ancient times, in the Druid times, was always the place where death was encountered.